So yes, hello everybody, and I'm very happy to be here, and I apologize for my German accent, but it's live. Yes, as Stefano said, we met last summer in Berlin to work together, and in this particular format I did something I never did before, and maybe don't do ever again. No, I will do it again, but maybe it will take some time. So maybe this lecture today, since it is about this experience, is maybe a beginning of a AA lecture series. Don't try this at home. It's kind of a very experimental setup that kind of brings together the both of my lives, that are urban theory and music, which, as Stefano already mentioned, have nothing to do with each other, which is right. So now the lecture has the name Thinking Space Musically. I will try to elaborate on that. So I'm from Hamburg, I'm from Berlin, but I'm teaching in Hamburg at this format, which is only in German here. It's a master course called Urban Design. And in Germany, it's very special because urban design is like Städtebau. Städtebau is a German word, and it means building city or something. And it's in between planning and architecture. So if you see, planning is more coming from the global aspect of the city, and architecture is coming more from the object. So Städtebau as urban design is kind of in between. And we are at this moment building up this master course, which has a lot of different levels. And I'm teaching the theory part, and this theory part is very much connected with practical things. So the students should always test the theory in a practical setting, but never in a musical setting, because this should be kept apart. Now, the first set of my lecture will be on notation. And there was an article by Steve Allen called Practice, Architecture, Technique and Representation in 2000. And he said, traditional representations presume stable objects and fixed subjects, but the contemporary city is not reducible to an artifact. The city today is a place where visible and invisible streams of information, capital and subjects interact in complex formations. They form a dispersed field, a network of flows. In order to describe or to intervene in this field, architects need representational techniques that engage time and change, shifting scales, mobile points of view, and multiple programs. What is implied here is that you need new ways of representation and new ways of experiments in representation. I mean, this is something that you experience at the moment. There are so many mapping techniques on the way. I think you're constantly busy with different types of mappings. And what I want to elaborate today on is that there's a difference between a mapping and a notation. Mapping is a notation, but a notation doesn't have to be a mapping. And the notation is always concerned about the performative aspect of a representation, although being non-representative. That's the paradox of notation. The notation is always coming into life through performance, but it is never reducible to the performance itself. And musical notation is a very, very good example of this. And maybe you can elaborate on development of that. The key notion is diagram. Okay, I mean, you have heard so much about diagram. I mean, there's every second week there's a symposium on diagram, but I have to elaborate on that. I have to. The important thing about a diagram is that it is not a form. This doesn't mean to take form not serious, like 60s when you try to implode the form or be informal as you can. No, a diagram is a meta form. You have to be even more conscious about form than when you're like working on a direct form, so to speak. And a diagram has a very old history. Now you see a writer from a medieval times that tries to elaborate on a thought about harmonies in the universe, and he has a kind of a difficulty in expressing what's happening in the universe only with language. It can happen to each of us that you cannot express with spoken language what you want to say. So he made some diagrams to that. These diagrams are completely simple and they are reductive, but at the same time they are imposing something on you. I mean, that's something that the contemporary arts are working on all time, is imposing things on you. Yeah? Where at the times of mimetical art, the artist was really trying to mimetically be informed by the ideas and show you the ideas as a Madonna or as an apple or whatever you want to call it, very realistic. So the job of the artist was to not impose something on you, but to relax you. That was the job. Was because it was completely different times. He was informed through the idea by Plato or through God in the medieval times. So that was his job, to project. It is only since aesthetics have arrived, after revolution came, and there was like a bourgeoisie that had to give itself a new order, not a clerical order, not an aristocratic order, that you could discuss about aesthetic endeavors. And it's even the point of Hannah Arendt to say that aesthetics and politics are very much connected because they are connected in the art of debating or negotiating. So now it's a very stressful job to go to a gallery because you have to interpret what's happening. You have to read what's happening. That's the whole deal. Same thing with the diagram. So actually these diagrams are very revolutionary, although it's medieval times. Now what happens in music? Music is always very late. Now you see a very old graph, and this old graph is kind of imperfect and it's open, and when the note is coming in time, this has to do with space, it has to do with the church. Yeah, if you sing in a church and you have the timing too specific, the music won't come to life. So, although this is a shortcoming of very old notation, because they didn't know how to place the metric in a space, it was also very coherent with the space that we're singing in the church. So this will sound very good in a church, because people don't know when it's happening, but they are always following each other, and the space is opening, and it's a lot of reverb, and the whole power of music is like banging in your head and giving you the order, like a mimetical fact. Yeah? So this is like very, very strong, although it looks very open. At that time, it's very, very strong. Now you see that music notation has developed over time, and it got more and more concrete. So now what you see, Igor Stravinsky, kind of score, you see that there won't be any discussion about when things are going to happen. There's no discussion. And Igor Stravinsky, he was very intense on that because he had a metronome at his piano desk, and he was always checking when it's too boring. Then he would cut out things. So he was very, very precise, like he was very industrial in his thinking. And this is industrial thought as symphony. Yeah? Okay, Now I go to the second half of the 20th century, when the musical thought has developed through a next step. And there was a guy, Eberhard Karkoschka, who was like analyzing all these scores, and he said, clearly musical thinking has changed so much that the whole framework of notation up to now, and it is not alone, has changed so much as if it was unleashed by an explosion. This means that the notation like that doesn't leave any freedom for the performer. It doesn't impose any performative task of interpretation to the performer. The interpretation is very, very limited. So this is when in the 60s new forms came to life. Now it is very important for the point that I want to make that this happened not because they wanted to be informal, but because the form imploded as structure. It's very important. If you go on the notion of diagram, also in architecture, it's very important to read. If you are quoting Deleuze, Foucault, and what you are quoting, if you want to quote it, a very good hint would be you quote also the small book about structuralism of Deleuze in the 60s. And this is the whole system that he unfolds there, and how he gets to the diagram as a functional device of structure, of imploded structure. Okay, as what you see here is Pierre Boulez, and with Pierre Boulez, like the music as written comes to kind of an end, because you know the serialism and the serial notes are completely checked out. So you have series not only of notes, like you had with Schoenberg, but everything is serial, like the dynamics, the form, everything is serial. So everything is structured, and the structure is then composing the form. This is very important. The structure is composing the form with Boulez, but nevertheless, the works he writes still have a complete written thing, so that it's clear how to interpret it. But if you see something like that, this is a diagram, and this is a complete shift, because you know the structure has imploded, the form has imploded. Now how get you things to function? And these are like three major architectural notions: function, form, and structure. How do you get the music to function? Now you are inventing graphical notations to expand the notion of form itself. And this is very important. But for example, Earl Brown writes, open form in which on one hand serial music is given up a little way in, and on the other hand a few elements of aleatory music are included. Both of those originated with jazz. This new movement inspires Brown to write new, essentially more flexible compositions, as if it had been possible in ordinary metric standard notation. So that's important. You still have if you want to really play this, you have to have the metric framework of the music in your head, otherwise it will just go like that. You know, same with Cage. If you don't have this structural framework, it just won't work. So this is very important to to follow. So now you have different aspects of this musical endeavor, different ways of notating, and all these notations are connected to a performance. So they have to be interpreted and have to be read, like a city has to be read nowadays. Okay. So this is Bruno Madana with the serial things. Now Karl-Heinz Steckhausen. This is only plus minus kind of diagrams. Very interesting of Kontakte. And this is Edgar Varese. You know that Edgar Varese was very influential for Xenakis, who then worked with Corbusier on this pavilion in Bristol. And this is Edgar Varese chart and Yanis Xenakis chart. This is Bernd Alois Zimmermann, so already completely different. And what you see is that everybody finds his own form to do this. Now you see Cage, and this you see already how different it is, that Cage is completely phenomenological. He believes in the phenomenon of this ereignis, this event, and this event will happen. He trusted, and I still cannot believe how he had this trust, because I mean there's so many people that really played this very badly. I still don't know, but this is something that is part of the city today too. You have a lot of things that you design and people do it very badly, but this is another topic. Okay, so this is another John Cage thing. Okay, now you see Earl Brown is completely different. And Earl Brown, this is what the point I want to make is, this looks like a diagram. This could be even architecture. This could be like a Schwarzplan. What is Schwarzplan in? A figure plan. A very Kohlhasian figure plan where you have completely distorted a city concerning to function, maybe. Yeah, you can imagine that there's a grid beneath, that there is kind of a thing happening, and these are maybe functions in the city, but it is meant completely different, because Earl Brown was coming from a very structured music school, and for him, these are all performative layers. And this should all only inspire us to think in these matrix layers. And you cannot play this if you don't have this matrix happening. Just worthless. So this is very interesting. It imposes so much. It's one of the most complicated things to play. Most complicated. And there were a lot of recordings of Earl Brown music, very bad. There were very, very good performances in Darmstadt at the classes for new music. But at that time, in the 50s, Bruno Maderna helped Earl Brown. Bruno Maderna was a good friend of Nono and all these guys, and he was living in Darmstadt. He had a very good time. He never got famous, but he had a very good time, and always with a cigar bit like Cedric Price. And he really knew how to make music. He was very schooled, and he at the same time understood what Earl Brown wanted to say, because all the other guys, the structuralist guys, Pierre Boulez, and so they said, oh, this does not work at all, and something like that. So you need that's the thing that I want, you need a disciplined setting to overcome discipline. That's the point. Okay, you see Four Systems, and Four Systems was developed, David Tudor was a pianist, and he played all these things of Cage, you know, in the class of Cage in the late 50s in the New School, and George Brecht and all the guys, Bill Higgins, and they were all there, and they invented the events and stuff, but they always needed somebody to play, and who likes to play something that nobody wants to play. You needed some guy like Dave Tudor, who is a very good player, and nevertheless plays your stuff, although nobody wants to play it, everybody hates your music, and still he plays it. So he really deserved a birthday present. But at the same time, John Cage and Earl Brown didn't have any money because everybody hated their music. But how? So then they decided to give him a score, and Four Systems was a score that Earl Brown gave to David Tudor. I think it took 2 minutes or something, but doesn't mean that it's easy work. You know, all life. Earl Brown worked to get to this. Same thing with George Brecht. I mean, George Brecht, I really recommend the notebooks of George Brecht. The events that you get look very simple, but if you look in the notebooks, how many thoughts he had about what an event is, it's crazy. It's amazing. It's a laboratory. So this is just to show there was a guy who wanted to play this, and he made another diagram. The musician himself made another diagram to play what was written before. So, yeah, and he couldn't play it like that, so he had to make a different diagram to play it. Isn't that amazing? So this means that you have different epistemological spaces, different readings, and you have to invent tools to make these readings workable. So This was another composition by Earl Brown. I think didn't take too much time either. And there you see what Eberhard Bloom then invented to this. Okay, before I go on to the next thing, because I talked so much now, since education nowadays is also service. Yeah. Yeah, in Germany it's a very new thing. Service. So I play for you because I talk so much. It's service. These matrices going. So for example, if I play something like that, I know that this could be a G minor 7 with a normal 13, and this 13 I could go down, maybe not, and go to A flat, but I could also go down to F sharp or to C. If I think it like that, but I could also think it like E and go to A. But nevertheless, I know exactly what's happening, but I never think of it. That's the essence of this whole endeavor and this aspect of a performativity of knowledge. A performativity of knowledge that maybe is connected to what Nigel Thrift and Ash Amin, these geographers that you're very familiar with because they wrote this famous book, Cities Reimagining the Urban, wrote about an ontology, a critical ontology of the urban that is very much connected to an embodiment and encounter, an ontology of encounter, as it is also written by Latour and so on. So I go to the next step. I go very fast now. It could happen that the diagrams that exist could be read differently if they are read as notation rather than as mapping. So actually, that's the thing about it, and rather as a way of organization than a way of form. So I just go through this a structural thing. This is a constant. Ruhrgebiet is a completely different way for me. Whenever I've played, this looks completely different because it starts to move. Before, for me, it was like like a form. As soon as I play, it starts to move. It starts to develop time. And same thing here with Cedric Price's Fun Palace. This diagrammatic, but rather a functional device. So, Rem Koolhaas. So I just, just because these are so, these are always essays of trying to show what the city is, referring to what I quoted in the beginning, that we need new representations, new ways into this epistemological space of the urban itself that doesn't reveal itself just like that. It's hard work, and this then could be seen rather as a notation that opens up as a form of organization. And this is very interesting that in this Oase issue about diagram from 1998, Wouter Dehn and Udo Garretzmann already wrote, Rem Koolhaas too often uses metaphorical expressions to convey a concept. Unlike Unger's metaphors, Koolhaas' metaphors are not so much about analogies of form than analogies of operating mechanisms. These metaphors therefore have nothing to do with representation. We are talking here about organizing principles described by the metaphor, an interaction of elements which are conceptually charged by means of analogy and association. And this is very important because a lot of times these things are read as form or as a representation, but they are not. They are just charged, and everything that is charged has to be kind of actualized somehow. It has no value if it's not actualized. And it's the same with the musical chart. If it doesn't perform, if it's not performed, it's very interesting. So that's a different reading of that. I just go through like very fast. Now you see also this thing when you have a function in this diagram and how this diagram starts to move according to the function, and like that, and that. It's also, this I found very interesting because it's also like a mix where you try to catch things that are happening in a very small scale and to multi-scale this. And this is a very musical thing to do, multi-scale. Music is always multi-scale, and actually architecture is too. But it's not about form, but meta-form. So you see how this is connected here. This experiments in trying to represent. Now, in this class that Stefano mentioned earlier, we did some experiments on that, and it was very interesting. So one group, they were working on a site near the Berlin Hauptbahnhof, and they were very excited about the plans there. So, I mean, just see it as an experiment. And this is now how they tried, being inspired by the scores, tried to sequence the plans and make indexes of it, and to see the frequency of plans in this area, and then to notate it in this way, and to catalog it. And then there was another group that was working on Berlin Alexanderplatz, and was just a small island in the street. And then they also were thinking like musically about it, and then they were concerned about the intervals of moving traffic, which is a very simple thing. I mean, it's very obvious, but these obvious things look different when you look at them musically. But don't exaggerate it. It's just an addendum, something. It's just a mode that you can use. It's not a general mode, okay? So, and then they were inspired by the by a graphic chart, and this way they looked at this traffic situation also differently and tried to record the world as happening. Then they came to this scenario, which would be like a very normal scenario, but it means something different. It's meant as a musical act, and then you had the performances there, and then you have the musician there. Okay. So, what is important at this point is that you see the diagram structurally as an abstract machine and not as a form. Deleuze says the diagram is an abstract machine because it precedes the distinction between form and substance, between content and expression, between a discursive formation and a non-discursive formation. This means that the diagram is blind, it does not represent, but it is charged with all the functions. In this way, I would propose a different rereading of Deleuze as a functionalist philosophy, but a functionalism that comes from bottom up. So it's like a kind of a reversed functionalism, you can say. Because the diagram or the structure does not work if it's not charged with energy. That's the thing. So if you see it just thematically, form means that you have a kind of an imaginary of the real. Yeah? You have an idea. This is what form means. Now, structure was an invention of the 60s to say, okay, between the image or the idea and the real, there's something, a link, a relational link, that is the structure, and the structure is pre-extensive. That means it's before even ideas and reality come to life. It's before that, structure. The only thing that structuralism said is that made it to the form in this way, that they said, okay, the structure itself is beyond time and does not develop. It's always there. And if you go like that, then you have only structures and no forms and no reality anymore. It's like Claude Lévi-Strauss said, I'm not a subject, I'm a place. So I don't know what yesterday was, maybe tomorrow, but don't bother with me, I'm a place. So if you come after the lecture to me and say, hello, are you Christoph Dell? I say, no, I'm just a place. Okay. This is a completely different concept. And Deleuze was really working himself through this concept and said, okay, this is a great tool, the structure, to read structure. As I said here, these are all structures, very minimalistic motive structures, but they don't get to work if you don't have the functional device of it. But the function cannot be the function of Bach, for example. It's a completely different function that has to be made in the moment. Takes place because my body is informed with what's happening. And for me, this is very closely connected to what's happening in the city, which is embodied like a kind of a tacit knowledge of performative actions from which the city unfolds. And this is what the next project, I'm going through it also very fast, the next project is about, is a book that is actually about a very, very small research that I did in Kolkata, formerly known as Kolkata. And this is a very special case because it's a little bit like Berlin. that's why it was so nice for me to be there. I felt very familiar. It was a very important place, a very important city, and it really had a huge decline, and it lost a lot of its economical impact over the years, and that's why a huge part of the population is involved in informal sector. Okay, so these are like those of Kolkata. So this is interesting. 82% of the consumers buy at the hawkers daily, but they don't even know it. The hawkers, you know, are on the streets. They are selling all the stuff, and you have only 6% road space in Kolkata, so nobody can drive to the supermarket. It's impossible. Everybody wants to drive to the supermarket, but it's not possible. So you buy directly where you are. That's the thing. But nobody knows that he does. It's very interesting that what you will see. So these are certain people that have actually not a bad education, but they have no job, so they just go out and create a job, something on the street. And John Bremen said rightly that a long time, because everybody was thinking about function from above, nobody was really taking care of this informal way of structuring the street. So as you see, okay, there are new uses invented, and it's very interesting because this food has a high variety. It's very cheap. It has a higher variety than any supermarket. Okay, good. Now you see when you think about all these diagrams that are working on the city and the political impact, is that there was a huge conflict about these hawkers because they were encroaching the streets, and you wanted to have the streets free. So there was this Act of Kolkata Municipal Corporation Act. This has been decided to declare any such encroachment by the hawkers, stallholders, and other organizations as a cognizable and non-viable offense. So it's illegal. So it's very interesting. And then you have a political debate in public, in the newspapers and everywhere, about all the stress that you have with these hawkers. Although you buy there, you say it's very stressful there, like in the streets from the hawkers, it's very stressful and so on. So at the same time, because it's not legal, you have a high corruption. But this corruption is not mafia, but it's just police. Because police can always say to you, you are allowed to be there or not, because it's illegal anyway. So it's a big problem. This is on the debate on the right to the city. So the thing was, for me, to just bring this diagram to make it visible. That was the only thing. Yeah? So the special thing about it was that how can I make it visible? How can I get the context? Because there are so many sociologists around and writing about this, but it's very hard to get into what's really happening. So what I did was I played on the streets. I played on the streets of Kolkata, and there I made the contacts with them. So again, you have this performative plug-in, and you go there. And this is an interview that I made with a hawker organization. Here with two. Okay. Then I had a very special thing. Because I played in the streets, the police commissioner of Kolkata, who never gives interviews, he gave me an interview because I was playing in the streets, and he found it so out. So that he said, okay, I will give you the information. Okay, this typology of the practices that are forming the streets without having a form for it. Like a practice. For example, this guy was great because with them I could play very well because they were playing here and I was playing with them. So we had a lot of fun together. So you see the struggle that they are fighting for this right too. Then you see how the struggle then becomes part of a national policy. It's very recent, only 2004, that there is a legal commitment to the hawkers, and then it takes until 2006 that there is a commission at Kolkata really bringing the stakeholders together. And here you see how I play in the streets. So much for listening, and yeah, the essence actually is to rethink the city as a musical endeavor, but not to see like music one-to-one, but more as an operative mode of thinking, or a mode of ontology, or a music ontology. And you are a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. Any questions? Any questions? I know it's tomorrow is open jury, and so you're very stressed. So, but it would be wonderful if there would be any questions that I can answer. Please. I'm sure you have questions. Yes.
Just go back to your diagrams you showed earlier about. So do you do your own diagrams in relation to making music and space?
My own?
Yes. Do you do any?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't make diagrams. And my notations for music are very, very conventional. So I have to say that I play diagrammatically, but I don't use the diagram so much as a tool myself. I rather work on it with my students. So if they want to invent something, or they want to show something of the city, then I help them with their diagrams. But me, myself, I never make diagrams because I have a religious commitment to diagrams, which is very strange. I perform the diagram. For me, it's different. Everybody has different modes of how to work with things. But for me, the diagram is always there. So I do not want to make it, to write it down. But it's my personal weakness. I cannot write it down. I can only play or perform or talk or walk the streets or work with students. So it's a complete diagram that is completely full. But if I write it down, I stop this thing. So for me, actually, then a written diagram is rather something like, what can I say? Where do I have it? Like this book, like the books that I make, but they look like a normal book, but they are not. They are meant as a diagram. But I never really make diagrams. Sometimes I paint diagrams when I'm at a lecture. Then I paint them. But this is only when it's connected to a performative action. I never sit at home and making diagrams. Never. It only comes with a performance. So sometimes when I have a lecture and I have a flip chart, which I don't have today, then I'll be performing this, and then it will come out. Unfortunately, I cannot show it because I don't have the flip chart. But is it understandable? And this is very different from Rem Koolhaas. But Rem Koolhaas is not, or maybe it's not so much different from Rem Koolhaas because he never does it himself either. He has this team in Rotterdam sitting, and he's the diagram himself, and he always gets the fax, or now maybe email, I don't know, at night, and he's only sitting like this Amo is like a synthesizer. And it looks like completely informal. It looks like no practice, but it's next practice. It's unbelievable. Yeah? So, very hard to do. Very hard to do. So when I see a diagram of Rem Koolhaas, I always try to refrain from the first look that I have as a representational means. I always try to find what is behind the operational logic. What is behind that? In the same way I approach the city. So as a practice, as a discipline, as an askese kind of, and this I try to teach the students as a practice. But they will make different products out of it. That's the thing about it. And then I criticize their products. So that's how it goes. Oh, like some samples were these samples that we worked on in the AA notation thing. I can go back to it. Oops. But also there, I did not make them myself, but so this would be a sample of a diagram. Or this was a sample that came out of the group by, checking and making research, and then trying to make it abstract. And that's so great because, in architecture, you're always busy with making things abstract. But these abstractions are very much connected to a geometrical thinking, which is great. This is a basic matrix you have. It comes normally. You have to, like a bar or something. But this abstraction of a diagram is a lot more concrete because it's so connected to a performativity. And this is like connected to the performativity of what's happening in the street as an abstract layer to bring it to a geometrical level, but not to be dependent on the geometrical level. Yeah, that was so, when Stefano and I, we were always surprised, by what was happening, and we were not forcing it, but it was the conceptual layer of it. And same is when you have here, it's also like a diagram that happened in that class. To show a completely different aspect of a place near this Berliner Hauptbahnhof, which is completely devastated. It's empty. And this is shows that it's completely full. And that's a part of this diagram work. You go to a city, it's so complex you don't see anything. It's like when I stand here and, normally you must say, oh, this guy is performing, but he doesn't even have a score. Does he even know what he is doing? What kind of decision will he make? I mean, is he really knowing what he's doing? But that's the thing. I can do everything. Actually, that should prevent me from doing something. If you go to game theory, actually, it's not possible to play for me. It's impossible. But the task of diagrammatical work is to overcome the impossibility of doing something in complexity, but to work in constructively with disorder, because you see so many functions happening, and you see so many hubs happening, and so many structures happening, so many functions happening, so many forms happening, that you see everything, and then you let it go like that. Yes? Yes? No, I didn't want to. Okay, but that's how the thing works. So it's a purely conceptual thing, and for me it's interesting because now Nigel Thrift, David Harvey, so many are now thinking about the performative aspect. I was to a lecture with Ash Amin, and he said the city performs itself, and I said, okay, yes, but how is it organized? So everybody's talking about the flow and the city and the time and everything and the multi-complexity, yeah, but this is it. Multi-rhythm as form, that's it. But not as an aesthetic endeavor where you have your red wine afterwards, and say, oh, the city is music, and you relax. No, it's the other way around. It's a lot more work if you see it as music, because then you really have to dig in the abstractness of the concreteness. It's a bit like Marx with things buying. Everybody was buying things, and there was this very abstract little chart saying 300 pounds, completely abstract, but it was so concrete. So for me, it's the same with this performativeness of the city, or reading the city. Yes?
So can you talk a diagram like as a means of exploration? So do you mean, say, you can't quite think of something and you've got this structure, and putting the diagram down is like a way of exploring it, getting something concrete before it, you have to, if it's impossible before you've done it, then this diagram is like a way of putting it down. Is that kind of what you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you look at the hollow core of Koolhaas, it's exactly that. He doesn't know himself what the Ruhrgebiet is. Yeah, but he has to check it out. And he has to kind of reframe what's happening, and has to kind of make a chart that makes him perform. Yeah, it's that a paradox. It's a tool, like writing the manual of the spaceship while you are in space. And it sounds like flowy, but it's not. It's hard work. It's really hard work, because you're completely scanning all the time and making these diagrams to scan. That's why Fun Palace, for me, it's one of the first really, really diagrammatic buildings, because it's completely about research. And that is not built at all, for me, it's no problem at all, because it's completely about the research. And getting transdisciplinary people together to think in this diagrammatic way, with Gordon Pask or with Landau, or who were the guys all with Joan Littlewood was her name? Yeah, the theater maker. So to get this complexity happening, and you need diagrams for that, but you cannot take them for form. Yes? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay, this is a very good question. And this is very important, because this was the 80s and 90s way of thinking events to legitimize certain forms. Yeah, because you say, okay, it is an event. This event has to happen, and then you invent forms to make this event happening. This is like Toomey, or even diagrammatic thinking of Eisenman. Even more, Greg Lynn is that way. He uses, the same thing, diagrammatic thinking, but it's, you put it into a form to make the event happen. Yeah, that's a way of phenomenological thinking, which means that you do not think about what makes the event happen, but what makes the form happen to make the event. It's completely different. And this is also a big misunderstanding of Christopher Alexander. Christopher Alexander wrote notes on the synthesis of form to show how events come to life as formal principle. Now all the people say, oh, we cannot work with this. This is too abstract. Can you make something nice, something that we can understand? So he made this pattern language. Pattern language was read immediately as a representational device of form and not as what makes the event happen, but what makes the form happen. So it's really, really interesting. And for me, it's really what makes the event happen. So not a phenomenological approach, but rather a structural, functional approach. Otherwise, I always miss the event. That's the thing about it. I miss it. It's crazy. Although from outside it looks, I cannot grasp it because I'm so much busy about the structure of the event. But I will get it. I will get it. It's like a discipline. It's a meditation on the event. It's like a derive of the situationists. They went into the city. It was completely boring. And after 3 days, everything popped up like that. Like a musical sort of doof, doof, doof. But it was hard work. Hard work because they really wanted to be there, to find out what's there, and not to create forms to make an event happen, like an event city or all these things that you know from the 80s and 90s that have the same legitimation, same quotes from Deleuze, but meant completely different. Completely different. Does that help a bit, or? Yeah. And for me, it was really, because I really do not like to interfere, this like urban theory is that and music is that. Normally, I really don't do that. But it's only like the last couple of years that I found out that actually musical thought helps a lot. And it was so interesting when I talked to Stefano and Stefano said, oh, yes, music has thought about this problem, about this problematic, already 50 years before. And that's true. So, thank you so much. I know you are already very busy with final presentation tomorrow, and I have to thank you even more for coming this afternoon. It's great pleasure to be here and to be invited. It's wonderful. And if anyone has another question popping up in his own diagram sometime, just send me an email. I'd love to respond. Discuss. Thank you.